Picture this. You open your phone, see the message sitting there, and without even thinking about it, you close the app. You look at the task you've been meaning to do. You feel that familiar pressure settle into your chest, and you think, I'll deal with it later. You notice the bill, the call you need to make, the form, the email, that conversation you've been putting off for weeks, and your whole body quietly shifts away from it. Not because you don't care. Usually, and this is the part that surprises people, it's because you care too much. That's the strange, almost cruel irony of avoidance. From the outside, it can look like laziness, like you just don't want to try. But from the inside, it feels like protection. It feels like the only reasonable thing to do. And if that sounds familiar, you're not broken. You're doing something your brain learned to do probably a long time ago. Avoidance doesn't usually start big. It starts with one uncomfortable thing. One task that felt slightly too hard, too scary, or too loaded on a day when you didn't have much left in you. So, you delayed it. And when you did, something interesting happened. The tension eased, just a little, just enough to feel like relief. And that moment of relief, that's where the problem quietly begins. Because the brain doesn't know the difference between I escaped something genuinely dangerous and I just avoided an email. All it knows is tension appeared, you backed away, and the tension dropped. So it logs that as a success. Task appears, tension rises, you back away, tension drops. Success. Do it again. That's how avoidance gets trained into the nervous system, not through logic, not through choice, but through the simple, automatic language of relief. Here's something worth sitting with. The task is rarely just the task anymore. Somewhere along the way, a message stopped being just a message and became a potential judgment of your character. A deadline stopped being just a deadline and became a test of your worth. A conversation stopped being just a conversation and became a threat to whether someone still accepts you. A simple responsibility became a possible disaster. And once that happens, your brain is no longer reacting to the practical problem in front of you. It's reacting to the emotional meaning that has wrapped itself around that problem. That's why people can sit for 2 hours avoiding something that would take 8 minutes to actually do. It's not about the 8 minutes. It's about what those 8 minutes represent, what might happen after, what it might say about you. The task itself isn't always enormous. The weight around it is. This is the part that tends to make people uncomfortable because it means avoidance isn't random. It isn't weakness, it's actually working. Avoidance gives you a reward, not a meaningful one, not one that helps you in the long run, but in the moment, a very real, very immediate one. It removes the threat right now. It lowers your stress right now. It makes your nervous system feel like it can breathe again right now. And the brain is wired to prioritize right now. That's not a flaw you need to fix. That's how the system was built, millions of years before emails and tax forms existed. The problem is that avoidance collects interest. The relief you felt today becomes guilt tomorrow. The guilt tomorrow adds to the weight of the task the day after. Now there's a backlog. Now there's shame around the backlog. Now the task feels even harder than it did before you started avoiding it. So the strategy that was supposed to protect you starts quietly shrinking your life. The space of things you feel okay doing gets a little smaller, and a little smaller. And eventually you're spending enormous energy managing everything you're not doing. Let's be honest about what's really underneath a lot of avoidance. It's not, "I can't do this." It's closer to, "What if I try and fail? What if I embarrass myself? What if doing this confirms something I'm already afraid is true about me? What if the answer I get is worse than the uncertainty I'm living in now?" That last one is particularly common. Uncertainty is painful, but sometimes it still feels safer than a definite bad answer. So the task doesn't get opened, the result doesn't get checked, the conversation doesn't happen. And the thing is, you probably know, rationally, that avoiding it isn't helping. But knowing that hasn't made it easier. Because this isn't a logic problem. You're not just carrying the task, you're carrying the story about what it would mean if the task went badly. And that story can be louder than anything actually happening in the real world. A few things that don't help, even though they feel like they should. Waiting until you feel ready. That feeling is often a mirage. Readiness for hard things doesn't usually show up before you start. It tends to show up somewhere in the middle, after you've already taken the first uncomfortable step. Trying to think through every possible outcome before you move. That feels productive. It isn't. It's usually just procrastination wearing a very convincing disguise. Turning the task into a referendum on who you are. It's not evidence that you're lazy. It's not proof you're hopeless. It's a task. It has nothing to do with your fundamental worth as a person, even if it currently feels like it does. And demanding perfect motivation before you begin. Motivation is unreliable. It comes and goes. If you only act when you feel inspired and confident, you will spend most of your time waiting. Relief is not the same as progress. Overthinking is not the same as preparing. The way out tends to be much smaller than people expect, and that smallness is the point. The goal right now isn't to overcome the entire pattern. It isn't to finally become the kind of person who never avoids anything. That's too large. That's another version of the trap. The goal is to lower the emotional voltage of the task just enough that your brain stops treating it like danger. Not finish everything, just open the file. Not fix the relationship, just draft the message even if you don't send it yet. Not sort your entire life out, just identify the one next visible step. And then, this part matters, move before your mind starts negotiating. Because the moment the negotiation starts, the old loop almost always wins. The "but what if" thoughts arrive. The reasons to wait feel very reasonable. And another hour passes. So use less thinking, more contact. Open it, read one line, type one sentence, send one message, stand up and go to the room where the thing is. Pick an action that is almost too small to resist. That is not a trick. That is actually how the loop starts to weaken, because you're giving the brain a new piece of evidence. Evidence that contact with the task doesn't always end in disaster. That you can touch the uncomfortable thing and still be okay. Something worth saying directly. Sometimes avoidance isn't primarily a habit problem. Sometimes it's a signal. Chronic anxiety can make the threat response hyperactive, so that ordinary tasks genuinely feel dangerous to the nervous system, even when there's no real danger present. Depression can make initiation feel physically impossible, not just emotionally difficult. ADHD can create a specific kind of task paralysis, where the brain struggles to shift into action regardless of how much you want to. Trauma can cause the nervous system to brace against anything that feels uncertain or exposing. Burnout can strip away the internal resources that make starting feel survivable. If avoidance is affecting your work, your relationships, your health, or your daily functioning, if it's been going on for a long time and it's getting worse, not better, it may not be something you can think or willpower your way through alone. That's not a weakness. That's an honest read of the situation. Support, whether that's therapy, proper diagnosis, or simply understanding what's actually driving the pattern changes what's possible. For those who want to understand the mechanics, avoidance is reinforced through a process called negative reinforcement. You're not rewarded by gaining something good, you're rewarded by escaping something bad. That kind of reinforcement is actually very powerful. In some studies, it's more durable than positive reward. Every time you avoid a task and feel relief, that relief strengthens the association between the task and danger and between avoidance and safety. The brain isn't making a mistake. It's doing exactly what it was trained to do. This is also why avoidance tends to generalize. It doesn't stay contained. One avoided email becomes a backlog. One avoided conversation becomes distance in a relationship. One avoided responsibility accumulates into shame. And shame, neurologically, functions as a threat, which makes the next action even harder to start. Researchers studying procrastination have found that the most effective interventions aren't about motivation or discipline. They're about reducing what's called task aversiveness, the negative emotional charge attached to the task, and reducing ambiguity. Vague tasks feel threatening because the brain can't calculate what they actually require. When you clarify and shrink the task, the threat response often decreases on its own. There's also something called the Zeigarnik effect, the brain's tendency to keep unfinished tasks in active memory, generating low-level background stress. The relief of completion isn't just emotional, it's neurological. The system genuinely quiets down when a loop is closed. So instead of asking how you stop avoiding everything, ask a narrower question. What is the smallest action that proves I am no longer fully stuck? Not fix everything. Not overcome the pattern entirely. Just interrupt it once. Then again. Then again. Avoidance is rarely about laziness. That framing is both inaccurate and unkind. And it tends to make the problem worse, not better. Avoidance is about relief, about fear, about the meaning that has accumulated around a task until the task itself is almost beside the point. The nervous system learned to back away because backing away worked, at least in the short term. And now that pattern is running automatically, often below conscious awareness, shaping what you do and don't do every day. So the real move isn't to become someone who feels no discomfort. It's to become someone who can feel discomfort without treating it as a command to stop. The next step you take doesn't need to be impressive. It doesn't need to come from a place of confidence or clarity or motivation. It just needs to be smaller than the fear. That's where the pattern starts to change. Not all at once, but once, and then again. If something in this video stayed with you, maybe you recognized yourself, or maybe you thought of someone you care about. If you're someone who takes care of others, take a moment to extend that same care to yourself. And if you're someone who's been hard on yourself for a long time, someone who would never speak to a friend the way you speak to yourself, maybe this is a small reminder that you deserve the same gentleness you give away so freely. We're all carrying something. We're all, in some way, just trying to get through. Whatever you're avoiding right now, you don't have to conquer it today. You just have to take one step that's smaller than the fear. We move forward, together, and one step at a time.